hard.
But we should be making specifically so that they won't fight dishwasher. So that they were still fine. So he,
Who's still working? Oh, that's good. Okay. We good? Yeah, you gotta put your chips, you gotta put your food down first. Okay, sorry. You gotta take your left hand, you gotta put it right there. You gotta put your right hand right here, okay? With your left hand, say, this is where I feel. This is where I think. Put them together. Sometimes they come together, and sometimes they're at odds. This is where I feel. This is where I think. Sometimes they come together. Sometimes they're at odds. One more time. This is where I feel. This is where I think. Sometimes they come together. Sometimes they're at odds. Okay? I'll get a little bit into this. Those of you who did not know me, you made an opinion about me in 1/10 of a second. You weren't aware of it. It took you 1/10 of a second, predicated on how you're wired and your history. You looked at me and you said something to yourself about me. Now, we're in a surroundings that are pretty sedate and hopefully safe, right? But if we weren't, you'd be that decision every day about people you see. The environment we live in now, we need to make those decisions, unfortunately. This part is called our limbic region. This part is called our prefrontal and frontal cortex. This is where every feeling you have comes from. If I bore down right here, joy, peace, love, patience, kindness, lust, rage, anger, vengeance, right here. How you were wired, how I'm wired, how we live, how we grow up, who cared for us, who didn't, the environment we lived in. You and I are a collection of those three things. We'll talk about it. But first, the tragedy in Texas, right? Horrendous, terribly sad. And we see more and more of those things happening. If you take notes, I want you to, on the top of the shades of your, if you need a note, paper, whatever, write it somewhere. I want you to write these two words. When you get the very top, you can take notes if you want to go along the way. But what I want you to write, if you need information, sure. Okay. I want you to write these two words: injustice, INJUSTICE, injustice collectors, COLLECTORS, injustice collectors. I want you to write that word, injustice collectors, and I'll explain to you in a little bit what that means. If I forget, remind me, okay? When these shootings happen, we'll hear on the news, that person is crazy. They're nuts. They had to be, right? The reality is, most of the time they're not. Not to the standard that legally we would define that. The reality is that there are things called mental illnesses and there are things called personality disorders. They are not the same. Not even close. People who suffer from a mental illness are 2.5 times more likely to be victimized and victims of crime than to perpetrate them. When we see things like that and somebody says, schizophrenic, he killed people, you gotta be crazy. The legal standard of that is not even close to what we think. And most of the time, they're not. Why do we see that and why do we hear that? Well, because it's sensational, but it plays into what we call confirmation bias, which we'll learn. That if I look for something and you confirm it, I see it, it filters and I go, yep, that's the case. Most people aren't. People who suffer bipolar, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, any of those, the vast majority are not. Now, the reason we think they are is because we oftentimes don't talk about personality disorders. Those are the scary ones. And oftentimes, we hear nothing about that. Suicidality warnings on medications, you hear about that. Well, they were off their meds, they did this, they did that. Okay, but we don't have the full picture. You go off your meds, and I have patients who've gone off their bipolar meds, and I'm like, don't do that. I feel great. That's because you're on the medication. Do not do that, right? We had a personal friend who went up. She chewed up every voicemail tape we had for my wife. It was like 30 minutes, call, and we said, I think she's off. And that we go to her home, got a lot of money, we walk in, lands in, Gucci, all these clothes for her kids and her, thousands of dollars. And we sat down and we said, sweetheart, are you not taking your meds? I go, no, I felt great. Okay, we got a problem, right? They are typically not worrisome for me. Not at all. Here's the worrisome. You gotta do that guy is?
Yep.
Who is that?
Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy. Theodore Robert Bundy. So when we think, or when I think about people who are problematic, that's what I'm thinking. And not somebody with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, those things. If they're gonna be problematic, they tend to internalize. They take it out on themselves. Okay? And we'll talk about some of those things. This guy, in personality psychology, we have what we call clusters. Cluster A's are schizotypal, schizoid, paranoid. These are the people, they're pretty harmless, but they're very odd. You run into them. At a lady in court I worked with, oh my Lord, completely paranoid. She was a cluster A. Every time he'd come in, she'd say, this person's gonna kill me, they're gonna abduct me, they're gonna bury me, and there was no evidence, right? The person lives in Montana. They're like, okay, well, let's go. Cluster C, those are people who are obsessive, compulsive, dependent, avoidant, kind of me, okay? And then the cluster B's, they're problematic. These are the scary ones. These are what we call, maybe referred to as psychopathic or sociopathic. The technical term is antisocial. And under that subset is psychopathy and sociopathy, right? These are the narcissists. These are the people who, it's all about them. These are people who are histrionic. These are the people who want it all about them, and it's borderline. They're very erratic, very inconsistent. These are the scary ones we rarely talk about. These are the ones that keep me up. The only 2 times I have ever been concerned in my life, and for my family and me, was I had 2 narcissistic, antisocial, psychopathic clients that I worked with. I worked in a treatment facility for sex offenders and domestic violence, merged. The first one was a guy I testified in court to because his attorney friend of mine convinced me to do it, and I could have shot him after I was done. And I had to go on the stand. They don't believe it's on TV, and I understand. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sweating. I'm like, oh, I hate it. And I had to go on the stand. I'd worked with him 6 months, and he was terrible, terrible. He assaulted his kids in front of a supervisor. And I'm trying to help him. And then he blames it on me. And I testify, and thank God the prosecutor maybe read my dilemma. And she said, based on your experience and assessments, do you feel this gentleman has met all the standards for sufficient parenting, or would you say he might have a little more to learn? And I wanted to get off the stand and hug her, because I did not want to say, he's terrible. Don't let him have his kids, right? And I said, I would say the latter. He has some more work to do, right? And thank God the judge ruled, and we got out, we went with him, me, and the attorney. And he looks over at me and he says, well, a lot of good you were. I'm like, okay. And then he called the attorney, he had my number, and I had an outstanding bill with him. And he's like, yeah, why don't you come to my house and we can settle up? And I'm like, why don't you send it to the attorney's office? And he goes, no, really, I insist. I really like the process with you at my house. And I'm like, send it to the attorney's office. And then he said, how about if I bring it by your house? What's your address? 1500 Airport Road here? No, I'm joking. I said, no, you won't be bringing it to my house. My wife and I said, that's gone. Yeah, I'm collecting that fee. I don't care about that, right? The second one I had was a guy who was in sex offender treatment and domestic violence treatment. These are problematic. And I ran into this joker in Old Farm Lakes, where we live, walking my girls to the park one Saturday morning. 28 years old, he was walking his puppy. He knew as a sex offender, a registered sex offender, he was not to be within 500 yards of a park, nor was he have any enticement. An enticement is something you could use to lure children, like puppies, right? An animal, right? Anything that's unique, candy, whatever, selling balloons, whatever. And my daughters of course ran up and I didn't know it was him. And they'd go, Dad, a puppy. And I look up and I see him and he sees me. He's in treatment. Every Thursday, I do 3 hours with these guys. I know their whole history. He looked at me and I looked at him. I said, girls, we gotta get going. Mom's gotta take us somewhere. I made some, I didn't care. And I said, take off, and they took off, and I looked at him, and I said, Travis, you pick that puppy up right now, and you get back to wherever you were at. He said, I'm gonna call Bloomington Police right now, and then I'm getting in my car, and I'm gonna drive around. If I see you anywhere near a park, a child, a mom, anywhere near, we're gonna have trouble, and we're gonna have serious trouble. So I called his probation officer. We went to group that Thursday. I'm sitting in a group with all these offenders. And Travis looks at me and says, you are an a-hole. And I'm like, oh, this ain't good. I'm like, what? And it wasn't me who had to say anything. It was the other guys in treatment. And he said, yeah, how dare you call my probation officer? How dare you call her? You know I got locked up for the night, right? Cluster Bs are narcissistic and they are prone to never admitting they have a problem. They see you as the problem. And he went off, and I swear, if he'd known that it was just him and I, it would have been on. I believe he was that angry. I mean, his mouth was quivering, he was sweating. He was that angry. His other guys calmed him down. And of course, when my wife found out what happened, like, oh my gosh, I had to explain to her. She's like, oh, great. And I'm like, I know. So we had to take precautions. And I met with his probation officer, the psychologist who was treating him. And she said, I don't want to make you nervous, but he's the real deal. I'm like, oh, great. Like, real deal like what? She goes, real deal like Bundy. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you serious? She goes, Kevin, he was a perpetrator as a juvenile. He had sexual deviance. He would break into homes, steal women's underwear. He would shoplift. He went into the Army. He got kicked out within 6 months, and he did 6 months because he assaulted a woman. He went into the homes, apartments on base. He did the same thing. And now he's out. He's got 2 hands-on violations. He's been arrested for voyeurism, right? Showing himself. And she said, now he's waiting a 3rd. You know, the only reason he got married because his attorney convinced the judge that this would be good for him. She goes, no, he is the real deal. I'm like, oh, great. So I didn't go home and tell my wife, he's the real deal. Oh my gosh. So, and I get flooded fast. Like I go hot real fast. So we get done with group. He's just mad at me, spitting nails. And the guys would gather out in the parking lot, which you would know, and they talk and smoke or whatever. So we debrief, and the psychologist goes, ooh, you be careful. I'm like, I will. So I go out to my car, and guess who's in the parking lot with me? Travis. And Travis walks over to me, just he and I. And I'm like, oh, this could get bad. And he looks at me, and he says, so you live at Old Farm Lakes, huh? Yeah, he goes, your girls are cute. Oh, I was like, instantly. And so mad. Now, with psychopathy, you gotta figure out, that ain't the time to have a person with him, right? I knew what he was saying. His undercurrent was, I'm threatening you, right? And so I said, Travis, you need to understand 2 things about me. You know nothing about me other than I'm here and I'm a therapist. My father was 3-part alcoholic, abusive, narcissist. And my siblings and I made it through that. You don't scare me at all. And the other thing is, I see you anywhere near where we live. I see you anywhere near any park with a kid or a mom or anything. And said, I will call 911 and then you and I will have a problem. You understand? And he just looked at me. I said, I'm serious. He got in his car, I got mine. I was pumping a drill in the handshake. And eventually he got arrested 2 weeks later. And the probation called me, Kevin, good news. He got arrested. He's gonna be charged. I think he's gonna get 15 to 20. I'm like, oh, hallelujah, right? Well, you didn't really show him Jesus. I mean, you can find Jesus in a jail cell just like you can out here. Right? It's all about mitigating risk, right? I ain't playing. Like, this is serious, and we live in a serious time. This is what we're talking about when we hear people who are shooters and that we know nothing about the full story. One of the factors we see injustice. One of the themes that virtually half of people who perpetrate these horrific crimes is injustice. They felt hurt when they were younger, they felt hurt when they were a little bit older, and that hurt morphed into anger, and that anger morphed into, I'm gonna take it out on society. Mm-hmm. They had no mental illness per se, like you and I would consider. So, NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity, it is successful 1 in 400 cases. Now, people will go up. I did that because that was insane. They'll try it. About 1 in 100, 1 in 400 succeed because they are. I had that guy that attorney who, I never took any more clients from him. He was a fairly renowned defense attorney when he was younger. He had a woman who was in GRI, not guilty by reason of insanity. She was homeless, and it was winter, and a lady came to try to help her. She was in the street, she looked disheveled, she looked despondent. She went to help her. Unfortunately, the woman had Huntington's disease. Huntington's is a terrible disease. It atrophies your brain, you move into psychosis, eventually you die at a very young age. And she attacked the woman and almost killed her. And so they brought her in, and they did a bunch of genetic testing, and the prosecution, the judge, and the attorney said, there ain't no way she knew what she was doing. Because when they interviewed her, they said, what was going on? She was, I was being attacked by a big dog. She goes, I see him all the time, right? And she truly saw him all the time. She had the Huntington's was atrophying her brain, and the frontal lobe was not taking anything that was rational in. So you see cases like this. He was diagnosed with manic depression. That was a psychiatric diagnosis. They did a thing of like 75 psychiatrists, psychologists. 80% said he's antisocial and he's psychopathic. The others said he's narcissistic. Right? Now, how do you? Somebody said, "Well, can you spot a narcissist?" No, I can't spot somebody antisocial because they appear so normal. Right? They will come up to you and they'll act like they're the nicest person and they care, and all the time they're thinking, "I'm going to get over on you. I'm going to get over on you." Right? So it's challenging unless you have a history. So when people go, "I can spot that," good luck with that. I'm like, I worked with them. I couldn't tell you that. So it's very challenging. So we're going to look at a couple things here. Okay. So we're going to look at some things. We're going to look at depression because that's prevalent. Since COVID, the numbers of people diagnosed with anxiety and depression has skyrocketed among kids and adults. It has shifted everything in us. It has been so hard. Major depressive disorder, there is mild, there is moderate, and there's major. I've got symptoms here for you if you guys want copies of them. But you see things like sleep disruption, fatigue, somatic complaints, people, body hurts, sadness, of course, those kinds of emotional reactivity, right? And we see those. Now, one theme we run into with depression is guilt and shame. People who are depressed and majorly depressed oftentimes feel this inordinate amount of guilt, inordinate amount of shame. And that's a part of the depression. Like things they did, things they didn't do, they can't see the positive. They only see the negative. Now, guilt and shame can, not so much shame, guilt can be functional. You go, well, I don't want guilt to be functional. It can be. In helping us correct our behavior. If you all said something negative about Jason, and I piled on, right? And later he found out, and he called me. I feel terribly guilty about that. I'd be ashamed, right? Because that's not the case. People who are cluster B, the narcissists and the antisocials, they don't feel guilt and shame. They'll act like they do, they don't feel. The problem is that people who are majorly depressed feel it all the time. It goes from, I learned from that, to I am that. You understand? That's the disorder, that's the disease process. I always tell patients, we learn from guilt and shame, right? It's informative, it's instructive. We don't live in it. You understand? We do not live in it. If you're living in it, we gotta talk, right? You did something when you were 12, and now you're 20, we gotta talk. That's a part of the disease process. And here's the deal. You wanna help somebody? You don't let them live in it either. You challenge them, you understand? I have couples who come in, and some of them have pre-checkered backgrounds. I say guilt and shame is a major theme, not only among people depressed, but children who've been abused. Terrible guilt, terrible shame. And I say, when you find out what their Achilles heels is, whatever the negative part of their life was that they keep hidden, which we all do, right? You don't pull it out on them. You pull that out on them, you're putting them right back into guilt and shame. And as believers, right, what are we supposed to do? We're not living in guilt and shame, because guilt and shame is death. You've been forgiven. I have, right? You mean other people. You don't want them living in guilt and shame. It's death. We are oriented toward life, right? We are oriented toward hope, oriented toward a future that's positive. So part of the disease process is they live there, and we have to challenge it. We have to help them move forward. Generalized anxiety, there's major things here. The most pressing is GAD, generalized anxiety. We maybe felt that a little bit, right? You take a test, you're gonna perform, you're gonna play sports, you get like the jitters, right? You're like, oh, and I tell kids, that's okay, that's good. Because that's informing us that you step up, like over a canyon, you look down, you get that sensation like, oh, that's informative, right? This is not. This is the stuff that you're watching a movie and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel this hot flash, like tingly, sweat. That's what we're talking there. Panic disorder is obviously short-lived, but it's intense. It's like a raging issue in your body. It's intense, but it's short. And oftentimes people with panic disorder will say one thing, I'm dying. And it feels like they're dying, right? So one of the take-homes we want is that whatever happens in our head happens in our body. And what happens in our body happens in our head. No longer, if somebody said, yeah, it's all in Jason's head, man. No, they're speaking ignorance, because it is not. When your heart palpitates, when you are sweating, when your head is spinning, that's not in your head, that's your body. Right? It is a physiological response to what's going on. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? One of the highest rates is among females who survive sex offense. And they often have that. Military people we typically think about, children who have been hurt, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, traumatized when they were little. We can learn from the anxiety. We don't want to live in that, right? So here's the first little thing we're gonna do. Let me teach you how. Simple thing you can do with your kid or you if you're anxious. Okay, take your finger and draw a box. 4 sides, right? When we are anxious, we shallow breathe. We move into something called respiratory alkalosis. We have too much oxygen in our blood, in our body. We're not putting enough carbon dioxide there. So the breathing increases, we're like, oh, yeah, it's terrible. And it is, it's awful. So what we have to do is we have to bring back the balance. So what I'm gonna have you do is, on this one, we're gonna go 4 sides, right? We're gonna do 4 dots on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Now, put your hand here, your stomach. We're gonna do diaphragmatic breathing. Okay, so we're going to, on our first 4, we're gonna breathe in from here. We're gonna go, pause for 4, and now breathe out like you're blowing out a candle. And then pause for 4, okay? So the first 4, breathe in, pausing for 4, hold out, and then 4. So we don't do anything on 2 sides, the top and the bottom, that's where we're doing it, right? Some call it box breathing, some call it, I don't know, 44 breathing. We do a number of those things. Now that will do 2 things. One, it'll put more carbon dioxide in your body. It'll bring your oxygen concentration down, and you'll feel your heart rate come down, respirations, those things. So if you have a propensity towards that, then that's something you can do. That's very simple. I teach kids that, parents that, I'm like all the time. You can do this at night before you go to bed, do it in the morning before you take a test, right? It helps. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that with anxiety and depression, there are medical underpinnings sometimes that you always have to rule out. 30% of patients, I think, who are diagnosed with depression and anxiety actually have an underlying medical condition. So when people see me, I always say if they have anxiety, depression, at minimum, I want you to get a full thyroid panel, not just like your TSH. I want a full thyroid panel, vitamin D, vitamin B, and then if you're older and you're having issues getting like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, those kinds of things. So those, because there's some medical disorders associated with that. So at the very minimum, if somebody's experiencing those, I want you to consider that there's an underpinning, could be underpinning of medical condition, okay? So you go to the doctor, you're like, hey, I feel sad, I feel down, depression. Maybe, but maybe not. And tell you the number of people who've come to me, they're like depressed. Like, yeah, have you had thyroid? No. Have you had these done? No. I'm like, okay, that's what you have to do. The other thing I want you to think about is sleep disorders. Sleep apnea is huge. Guys like me get sleep apnea because I'm bigger, right? And that can cause all the symptoms of depression. So testosterone that is low, hormone levels that are fluctuating, those kinds of things all impact and they present with the same symptomology that these do. So if you have that, or feel those, do it. Now, how do I know? Because my wife was misdiagnosed. She was in nursing school. She'd come home, she's tired, she'd lay on the couch. Her doctor said, well, you know, it's stress of nursing school. Probably stress of living with your husband, right? and so she went and talked to the lady. We got done. She goes, what'd you talk about? I don't know, not much. I mean, like, I'm tired, school's hard. And then she started getting cold, really cold. And we're like, I don't think you have depression. She goes to her doctor, runs a thyroid screen, boom, she is hypothyroid. She has hypothyroiditis, right? You take some meds and guess what? Your energy picks up, you're not cold, you don't want to lay on the couch all the time, right? So when you have a kid who has that, don't just accept that unless or yourself, don't accept it without some confirmation. We need objective evidence to rule things in and out, okay? It still could be, it still could be, but I never just accept that, right? Unless they've done the full workup. Nope, this is what I want. And most doctors are really good about helping with that. So let's talk real quickly about who we are. So we are three parts. One part is your genetic makeup. You get your mom and your father's DNA. And you have 23 pairs, so we have 46 pairs. And these things are what we call nature. You and I are pre-wired for life. We are pre-wired. There was a philosopher, Rousseau, who said, people are tabula rasa. That's Latin for blank slates. He didn't understand neuroscience, right? Probably a cool philosopher, I don't know. But that was way a long time ago. That ain't even close. You and I are pre-wired. We come. Cystic fibrosis, if you have cystic fibrosis, you get one dominant gene from a parent, and that's all you need. You have Huntington's disease, that lady I talked about, one gene, she got it from her father. It was the dominant, and boom, it is a course that you do not want. You would not want to wish that baby. Breast cancer, 1 and 2. We're all wired for that. What? We all are. Men, we're wired for breast cancer. Men get breast cancer, very low rate, but there's still cases of it because of the tissue, the way we filter things, the globules in our chest. We're all wired for that. Mental health issues, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar. The research is clear. There is an undercurrent here. There is a specific amount of genes that we have. How those get activated, how they get turned on will be the next two parts we're talking about here, right? There's no doubt, we understand that. In fact, Northwestern Medical School developed the first blood test in 2019 to look at major depressive disorder. Those have biomarkers. Just like if you had a heart attack and you went to the ER and your doctor would do blood work to see what kind of enzymes level were elevated. The problem is we don't have the ability to develop yet a blood test that is confirming, but the genetics of it is there. And you get it from parents, but it's not simple. It is a complex part of who we are. It's several. Cystic fibrosis and Huntington's is what we call Mendelian inheritance. That's just, you only need one from your parents. These are complex. BRCA, mental health issues, they are a multiplicity. And when they get turned on, they downregulate what we call neurotransmitters and hormones. That means it's like, effectively shuts it down. And when those get shut down, guess what we feel? Sadness, fatigue, we're not sleeping, we're not eating, we are irritable, all those things. So that's it. Personality traits, how many of you have kids? Do you have kids who are like extroverted, introverted? Are they all like hard sharp? Who's got like a mix? Okay, so you see this, right? Like in terms of kids. If you have one kid who's like super compliant, you're like, oh my angel. And then you get the next one and you're like, what happened? Put him back, right? Yeah. Personality traits, whether you're introverted or extroverted, it's mediated genetically. About a point, what we call correlated study, 0.65, 0.7. That means that over half of who you are, if you get up on stage, you're in the extrovert end, you want to go home and read a book, and you don't want to hang out with people, you're probably more in the introvert end. You try to make an introvert an extrovert, you are swimming uphill, right? I had a boss one time, she was brilliant. She was a high introvert. The only time she sweated was when she had to go before like these Fortune 50 companies and present for 20 minutes about our program and what we were doing. She would break out in hives. She would be like, oh, terrible, I hate this. And she was one of the smartest people I ever met. In fact, she was so smart, she got hired by a Fortune 100 company. And when they hired her in, they said, well, 3 to 5 years, we have a management training program. We'll bring you in, and that's what we typically do. They hired her in, moved her right into a management spot. I mean, she was brilliant. This lady was sharp, right? I mean, she was on it. And in fact, when she was an undergrad, she had to take speech communication. She called her parents and she's like, I'm not doing that. They're like, what? She goes, no. Well, what do you gotta do? You gotta take a year of foreign language. I'll take French. Her parents go, you're gonna be ponying up some money for this. I don't care. I will take French, right? That's it. Personality traits are mediated most likely there. But you are not necessarily your genes. Those aren't your destiny. They push us in a direction, but that's not it. Here's what else helps. Nurture. Who loved you when you were growing up? Who cared for you? Who took care of you when you fell down, when you needed kindness, when you needed comfort? Who did that? And it doesn't have to be in your family. I always tell my patients, my kids know this, right? Your genome is not necessarily who your family is. How do I know that? Because both my kids are adopted, right? It can be, but doesn't have to be. Family is who loves you and looks out for your best interest, right? Not theirs, yours. So you have that. So love, affection, boundaries. Our long-term memory, the good, the bad, the mundane, those things we do every night. Prayers, bedtime, brush your teeth, good night moon, right? You're like, oh Lord, go to sleep. All those things. Now, if we had adverse childhood experiences, it was an entirely different program, but very similar. It can activate something called an HPA pathway. It's in the limbic, it's hypothalamic pituitary adrenal pathway. Kids who come from trauma backgrounds, they're active, and it is distressful. When they melt down big. When they get scared big, right? I mean, it's a part of how they're wired. Not all kids, but some. Another thing you can see is reactive attachment disorder. Reactive attachment disorder occurs in children who've not had a consistent caretaker. Grown up maybe in an austere background, or were adopted from like Russia or someplace like that. They've not had a consistent care. Guess what you all do in your work? You push back on that. You go, no, I don't. Yes, you do. Every time you hug that kid, every time you comfort them, every time you play music, right? That's what you're doing. You're pushing back on the distress they feel. You go, I don't You are so important, you have no idea. In the elevation anxiety that we have now with COVID, it's crazy. We are all tilted. It has disrupted our entire life. Some don't go to work. Some couldn't go to school. Some saw their spouse at home all the time. All the time. And I cannot tell you the people who go, I love you, but I don't want to see you 24/7. It has disrupted everything, right? And two friends who retired and both their wives said, you gonna get a part-time job? One guy, we have lunch, he came in and he goes, yeah, think about being a driver, but layman. I went home and talked to my wife, she goes, oh, you're taking that job. 6 to 6, 2 days a week. It has disrupted everything. And in reactive attachment disorder among children, they need consistency, they need love, they need care. And there's two types. One is called uninhibited. These are kids who will go to anybody. You and I filter with our kids. Don't go up and hug them. You don't know them, right? Don't go to the guy with the puppy. You don't know him, right? And then there is inhibited. These kids do not want to be touched, right? I had a family once I worked with. Their children were adopted from Russia. The little girl was at 3. At about 6, they diagnosed her. And all she would let her mom do was lay next to her. And the mom goes, can I hug you? No. You can lay next to me. And eventually you can hold my hand. She did not want to be touched. And that is a part of how she was wired, but it's a part of what happens here amongst us, right? The next thing that happens is what happens in our environment. All of these push on who we are. Tornadoes, violence, there's a pathogen right there. That is the COVID virus, right? These push on us. You can have great genetics, you can have a great family. You get one of these and you get pandas. Not you get, but some kids get pandas. Pandas is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcus. These are kids who are doing great. They get a strep infection, and it's rare. They get a strep infection, and within a week or 2, you will start to see psychiatric symptoms. Obsessive compulsive disorder, irritability, anger, rage. And they're like, what happened? That's what happened. It doesn't necessarily have to be strep. It can be other viruses. COVID's been terrible. The reason it's terrible, it hits everybody differently, right? Did you get the full dose? Did you get partial? If you got a full, and we all got it, we might get sick, recover. Other people die from it, just by virtue of their genome. They can't mediate it. There's tragic cases of that, right? That all pushes on us. So we have this confluence of all of this, right? And in general, we're looking at 3 parts of our brain. The cortex, that's a brainstem, that's our vital functions. The limbic system, that's where we feel. Everything we feel is right there. And then the frontal lobe is the thinking part. And we'll look at that. The limbic, we are limbic dominant from the time we are born. We start to get out of about 12, but the frontal lobe doesn't fully come online until about 25, 27 now, they're saying for men. About 27. Girls tend to mature, have more, so 27, unless you talk to some wives and they'll be like, my husband didn't never have a problem. He didn't never come online. I got to teach him everything. Right? That's instant judgment, it's survival. The limbic part of our brain is about one thing, survival. You got to stay alive. It does not make sense. Not at all. It doesn't have to. It's going to keep you alive. Panic, right? Acute, generalized, limbic overload. You hate the symptoms. My heart races, I get sweaty. Terrible, I know. It's terrifying. Limbic overload. It's a false, like you got the smoke detectors. I was like, we make cookies and a stupid thing goes off and our dogs go crazy. And that's what it is. It's like a smoke detector just going off. And you're like, what is wrong, right? You're terrified. And kids and adolescents, early adulthood. What informs the cortex? Everything that happens in limbic pushes up here. Everything. If you were abused as a child, guess what? Not good. It's pushing up here, and it will create what I call distress scripts. Yes? So when you give the kid a hug, sing to him, right? They see you, right? Guess what? You are safe. The limbic goes down. The threat detection goes down. Make sense? It comes down. I was sitting where I work with court kids, and I had one kid. We went to a restaurant. I used to take him out. And we're sitting, his back's like here. And I'm sitting here looking at the door and everybody. He goes, Kev, do you mind if we switch places? I'm like, no, no, come on. And he looked, and he was like, I see you have a little limbic overload. Dude, I gotta see what's going on. Cool, right? Absolutely, right? You don't deny this, right? You get an intuition about somebody. I was telling my students this, especially the girls, you get an intuition. I don't know about him. You listen to that. Do not dismiss that. That is telling you something. We are the only creatures that will violate that for social protocol. Right? Well, I don't want to appear rude. You don't have to appear rude. Just don't be with them, right? Not until you get confirming evidence that it's okay. You see number of girls who, one broke my heart, was assaulted by some guy, a friend of hers she met 2 times, and she said the hardest part of this was the fact that every time I met that guy, he gave me the jeebies. I did not like him, and he manipulated. She goes, it was hard enough to get over that pain, right? But she goes, I blame myself because I didn't listen, right? You listen to that. It's informing you of something. If you're not certain, you don't violate it, right? Because it's important. What happens though is when kids are abused, when we have massive like assault, things like that, we create limbic logic. That's what I call it, limbic logic. Those are distress scripts. These are distress scripts that come up into the prefrontal frontal cortex. Something happens, we have a bad experience, it's mediated physiologically, way different, and it moves up here and we create a distress script. So I had a kid one time, friends of ours, they divorced. Caitlin was 6, I think, and we were, again, limbic dominant, right? And they worked through it, and they'd been in ministry, it ended terribly. So Caitlin's working through this. At 10, she and mom are sitting in the drive-thru at McDonald's, and she looks over at mom. She goes, Mom, I know why we got divorced. You and Dad got divorced. She goes, what? She goes, I know why. Why? She goes, I was a pig. What? She goes, yeah, Dad used to come into my room. He said, Caitlin, you live like a pig. Your mom and you live like pigs. I can't take it. And then he left. See how it works? Distress scripts. She was overloaded. She was anxious. She was in a bad state. And when that physiology kicks up, especially negative stuff, it comes up here. To her, it made sense. We know different, right? Limbic is about survival. It's the seat of mental health issues. It's the seat of addiction. People who are addicted, that's what's happening. It is survival and it is self-soothing. It is about threat. It is about fight, flight, or freeze if you want defensiveness, but fundamentally it's about threat detection. That's why people who have drug addictions relapse. That's that pull. So let me ask you guys, bad day, tired, you're overwhelmed, you get to go home, and you're like, I'm done with the kids, put them to bed, right? I want to put my favorite movie on, leave me alone. What do you go to? What's your comfort food? Anyway, what do you like? Pizza, ice cream, brownie, what do you like? Throw some on. Popcorn. Popcorn, yeah. What?
All of the above.
All the above, right? Yeah, same?
Extra toasty Cheez-Its.
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, that's very specific.
Yeah, that's good. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Some people, I know in church, some people will go toward the adult beverage, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
But mostly, we go to that because why? It's comfort, right? We're not addicts, it's comfort. Now, let me ask you, why don't we go to, I don't know, carrot sticks and broccoli? Right? Doesn't that make more sense? It's better for it. Right, it does. Thank you. It does not make more sense, right? Because we're dealing with the limbic. We're not dealing with the prefrontal frontal cortex. We are limbic based. I want comfort. I want soothe. I want to feel better, and I mean right now, right? I don't care what the doctor says. Take your carrot sticks, cauliflower, broccoli, trio. You can eat it next week, right? That's all you want. You want soothing, right? And it's people with addiction, that's what they want. So we say, come on, get over it. You serious? You addict? You're just no willpower. No. We look at their history. Whew, some are ugly, right? Limbic is about threat detection, survival, feeling better, and defending ourselves, right? Kids go through that. Kids with trauma go through that. And guess what? It doesn't go away per se. You'll always have that pull. That's why when you care for your kid, you hug them, when you kiss them goodnight, you do all this stuff, right? It's pushing on the limbic. and it's telling you you're safe. Now, you don't realize that, but you're safe. You're cared for. You're loved, right? And that's filtering up to the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe, this is higher order thinking. This kicks in again, 20, something like that. Memory, language, and judgment. Those are huge. That's what the frontal lobe is about. Memory, language, and judgment. Should I do this? Shouldn't I do this, right? It is about impulse control. Now, and I know they made me mad. I don't want to hit them. I'll go to jail, right? That's about impulse control. Again, online, about 25, 28. And it challenges or informs the limbic. Okay? Guess what road rage is? What do you think road rage is, right? Road rage is limbic logic, right? Somebody looks at somebody and honks. Somebody looks at somebody and honks, right? I had this happen going down Oakland Avenue. I was in like a left turn lane. I didn't realize I had to go over, so I put my signal over. There was a dude in the truck. He was angry. I pulled up here, rolls his window down, gives me a certain gesture, and then spits on my car. Yeah, right? And I was like, well, once you did that, that's battery. I could take a picture, call the cops, and now you have just moved into the domain. And I was like, I don't know, maybe his wife left him. Maybe his kid got sick, right? I'm gonna go home. I'm not gonna do anything. I just like, sorry, it's turned left, right? Because at the end of the day, that informs me. To react from a limbic standpoint is not helping. And you'll see this, it'll gin up. We were in LA last year, my wife and girls, Pasadena driving, and the next day we heard about a situation where a 25, 27-year-old couple shot at a mom taking her 5-year-old car or to school. And it was one of those things. You did something, you honked, you looked, the guy gets out, fires at her, misses her and hits the 5-year-old dead center, right? Road rage. It's all about limbic. At some point, you wish somebody would have said, no, right? That's not gonna happen. We don't need it. So, why are mental health issues so caustic? One reason. They affect all of our systems, generally, but they do something else. They push up into here, the prefrontal frontal lobe. And we create these terribly caustic thoughts. And we can't help it because the physiology drives it. The downregulation of serotonin, of dopamine, of norepinephrine. You are guilty before you were even charged. You are worthless before you were even given any standard to live by. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And it's a part of the disease process. It's not something you can snap out of. You don't will yourself out of this, right? This is a physiology that has gone rogue. And if you've never had it, great, be thankful. If you do, you know what I mean, right? If I have type 1 diabetes, I feel awful. If my glucose gets low, I need insulin, right? If I have major depressive disorder, I am awful. You understand the difference? Because it pushes up on our thinking processes. And uniformly. Generalized anxiety, panic attack, it's like, I know I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. I had a guy, I was on staff at the Vineyard in Champaign, this guy, 10:20 at night watching the Illini play, and he started to sweat, and then his chest hurt, and then he couldn't breathe very well, and his legs wouldn't work, and his wife called a paramedic, took him in, and his heart rate looked fine, his EKG. They thought, he's having a pulmonary embolism, which is like a little clot, it's moving, it's blocking his breathing. Took him in to cardiography, took him, scanned everything, they checked the vessels and everything, perfectly fine. The guy said, cardiologist said, you had a panic attack. No, I didn't. You had a panic attack. Your vessels look like that of a 30-year-old. He goes, you give you some little bit of medication to help you, you gotta talk to somebody. And we finally talked for about 12 weeks, and finally the stuff went away. We talked about how hard his job was. He worked for a company, and they were terrible. They'd monitor you, videotape you. You had 5 minutes to get in, 5 minutes to get out. If you were 5 minutes over talking to people, you got dinged. He was under that pressure cooker. He had 3 girls. He was wanting to pay one's college, one's getting married. was overwhelming, right? And everything we feel when we're panicked, things like that, depressed, it drives the thinking process. It moves us toward what I call the doors of deception. There's about 10 distortions we take on. We all kind of do a little bit, but when you're depressed or anxious, they are prominent. And that's why I call them like the door of deception. It's like you walk and they're like, oh, welcome, I'm the evil one and I'm about to tell you what your future is, right? You have none. You are worthless. You won't get to where you want to go. Now, as believers, what do we know that? That's a lie. That's an absolute lie. Your physiology tells you different. We know that's not the case. We know that is not the case. So what do? I'll tell you some things we can do. Hindsight bias, confirmation bias, and discounting the positive all gin up. These are thinking problems. They all gin up when our depression, anxiety gins up. What's hindsight bias? We look back and we see things that we have failed at. It is fundamentally unfair. We look back, well, you didn't know this about me, you didn't know this, and we didn't know this. Confirmation bias. Our brain goes to survival mode, and we confirmation bias by linking to every negative thing that happened in our life. We discount the positive. That doesn't count. Couples who divorce, one of the things we know is they go back, hindsight bias, and the time I loaded the dishwasher wrong, you were getting at me. You meant to do that. No, I didn't. I was busy. No, you did. The time you failed to pick me up wasn't because the tire was flat, it's because you don't like me. You understand what I'm saying? Hindsight bias, discounting the pot. We go back and we recreate a history predicated on all of our faults and failures. And we discount every positive thing that goes on in our life. Every positive thing doesn't count. And that's one of the things. So what I say is don't feed at that trough. How do we do it? We challenge it. We challenge it. We say, this doesn't feel as bad like the bad stuff feels, but it is no less true. You understand? It is no less true. And we challenge it by doing cognitive reappraisal. That's Philippians 4:8, isn't it? Whatever is good, whatever is just, whatever is worthy, right? Think upon these things, right? You go, yeah, Paul, whatever, right? No, that's what we do. But we get very, very pointed about it. We understand what distortions we're running. We understand where they're coming from, and we challenge them. We say, no, I know that feels this way, and I know you're thinking that, right? This and this are out of whack because of the disease. This and this are not together because of the disease process. So I'm going to point out to you when this is wrong, why it's wrong. I know it feels, but we can't trust our feelings right now. I'm going to do this. And so one of the things we do in cognitive reappraisal, which is what I had you all do. I had you do all that. I want you all to know stuff about each other, right? And I want you to know the right stuff. Right? Not that, oh man, are you kidding me? Jason did that again. Come on. Right? No, that's not what we want. And I'll tell you, I was going to say, you can't write down Jason's name forever you like, right? You have to pick other people, right? So, what happens when we're depressed and anxious? We move into what we call objectification and not humanization. We objectify, not humanize. We see one thing wrong and we stick with that. And we believe it and we go with it. You are mean. You have never loved me. You have never cared about me. You always are out to get me. Right? A label. It is a label I hold about myself when I'm depressed or anxious. It is a label I hold when I'm angry about somebody else. Depression and anxiety is turned in. Anger is typically turned out. Make sense? We hold that label. You are no longer somebody that I can trust. You are somebody who did this to me. And that's what I remember because that's limbic dominated. That is about my survival. The frontal lobe helps me push back on that. John 8, Luke 17. Was not John 8, right? A woman caught adultery. Look at this, right? The Pharisee said she's caught adultery. Jesus said she's a woman. He saw the humanity of her. They saw the label, right? The lepers, 10 lepers. Who came back? That stupid Samaritan leper. We hate them. Well, Samaritans are ridiculous. They're heretical. They don't follow the Judaic law anymore. I mean, They didn't want the wall built. Come on, and he heals you? Are you kidding me? Right? See what I'm saying? He saw a person. They saw a label. Right? So who's your Samaritan? Maybe we all have it. I don't know. But if you have one, you think about this, your limbic is getting jacked up, your frontal lobe's shutting down. You gotta challenge it. Whoever that person might be. Anybody know Bob Knapp? Yeah, some of you do. Super guy, okay? When we first started, I had a buddy of mine we grew up with. He started here with his family. And we went out to coffee. And one day he says to me, I said, hey, kids are doing upward. Yeah. Like it? Yeah. What do you think preach there? Cool. He said, we're not staying. I'm like, what? He goes, no. I said, why? He said, Bob Knapp. I'm like, Bob Knapp? Like, we had a rehearsal dinner there. What do you do, make your bed chicken? What's wrong, right? I'm like, why are you not staying? He said, we don't abide what they're selling there. I'm like, you don't abide what? He goes, he's been divorced. I'm like, yeah, and well, we're not letting anybody up there teach us who's had that kind of background. Wow, really? Like, so you really want that pure as the driven stove kind of history, right? Familial, Billy Graham kind of, right? Theological seminary, that. He goes, yeah, we found a place we're gonna go to. I'm like, wow. I said, all because of that? He goes, yeah. I said, have you ever talked to Bob? No, I don't need to. You don't need to. So you're judging him on that. And, by the way, judging everybody here. Because if you see him, it's complicit, right? This is a conspiracy. I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm like, okay. I said, well, I hope wherever you go, it meets your requirements. I said, but I wanted to share something with you. I have friends who've been in church plantings all over the world. Asia, Europe, they've been to Africa, Australia. I said, and they were telling me about this one country where there was this dominant religious group. And there was an uprising of this new religious group. And they wanted to quell that uprising. And they did it by imprisoning and killing the people who were not like them. And I said, and one of the proponents of that was a cleric. He wouldn't, pull the trigger, so to speak. He wouldn't use the knife. But nonetheless, he was happy when these heretics were caught. I said, and he knew what he was doing. He was complicit without having any blood on his hands, right? I said, what if you had a guy like that who wrote something like, I don't know, love is patient, it's kind, it's gentle, it's goodness, it doesn't keep any record of wrong, it believes all things, it hopes all things, right? Or what if this guy said, above all these things, think about this, right? Set your mind on this. I said, what do you think about if that guy came to power and wrote that stuff? He goes, I wouldn't listen to him. I said, well, I hope in your new church, you don't ever read Corinthians. And he looked at me and he goes, what? Yeah, because the guy Paul, the apostle that's written this stuff, he was Saul of Tarsus. He was a freaking heretic. He wanted all those guys and gals and families who believed in Jesus, get rid of them. Get rid of them, we're done. I said, so I guess, I think Bob Knapp's background, that's pretty minor compared to that, right? Wouldn't you think? See, when we get into that objectification, it is saying more about our understanding of grace and truth and love, right? Redemption and care and God's healing power. It is saying way more about our lack of it than it is about any judgment we make. And I told him, I'm like, well, look, Bob's gonna keep doing what Bob's doing. Now, I interviewed Bob maybe once. He's gonna go on mission trips. He's probably gonna counsel people who are going through really bad times, probably worst time of their life. He's gonna love people, he's gonna care for people, right? When we objectify, we see one thing, and we see you are deficient. When we humanize, and especially if we're holding on to what we hold on to, we see possibility, right? So I came to this at 16. I got baptized, a buddy brought me to church, and I liked it. It was a little conservative church, and the people were cool. His mom and dad were awesome. My other buddy, they were best friends, his mom and dad were awesome. And I remember these two lessons said, I'll never forget. I was 16, I went over to my buddy's house to get a ride to church one Sunday night, and there was a check on the table. It was $150. It was for a family at church who were going through a terrible time. So they were gonna do an offering. And I said to Greg, your mom and dad are giving that. And he goes, and Greg's a philosopher. He goes, Dad, Kevin wants to know about the check you wrote. I'm like, that's not what I said. I just want to look at it, right? Come here, Dad. And his dad comes in. What's up? I'm like, I was looking at the check. Sorry, I didn't mean to be nosy. And I said, that's $150. He goes, yeah. I said, but you don't really like those people, do you? And he laughed. He goes, Kevin, would we hang out? No. Would we have lunch together? Probably not. Would we go out to movies? No. Probably not. Do I find sometimes their personalities a little off-putting? Yeah. But he said, you know, we talk about the loves. That's agape. That's not eros. That's not philios. That's agape. Agape is I do because it's what God wants me to do. I do because they have value. It's not about what I have. And what I have needs to inform them that they're cared for. I was like, seriously? This is crazy. I'm like, really? And that night they took an offering. I think I had enough money for like 3 months. The husband got a job. It worked out really well. But he said, I'll never forget that. Right, and the second thing, my best friend, his dad, and my other buddy's dad worked for a telephone company. Only my one buddy's dad was in the union. He was on the union side, and the other was on the management side, right? And a couple other guys in our church, a couple other people. It was small. It got 100, 125 people. I'm like, wow. And they went on strike. And the first night they did, that guy who showed me that, he went over to my buddy's dad's. They were best friends. He said, you need anything, you let me know. Right? You need anything, you let me know. We got this. Right? We'll get through this. Right? And that was a whole tenor among the thing. I was talking to a friend of mine. He does church, but he goes, you know how easily it would have been to rip that church apart had one of those guys gone to the pastor and said, listen, this is what I want. Do you know how much I give here? We are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Do you know how much you got to pay your salary, right? Doesn't that whole number? He didn't. Okay? That building now is gone. The cement that housed the 4 or 5 story, it's gone. There's dandelions, grass growing up. The parking lot's gone. The substation's all gone. And that little bitty church, it lasted. Those friendships lasted. You guys know that church. It's called Bail. Objectifying or humanizing. One, we see a label. The other, we see death. And when we are depressed, anxious, or angry, think about it. We go to objectifying. We do not see your worth. I do not see your potential talent. I see you are a problem. And we can do that for anybody. Anybody. Pick your group. Pick your group. Right? We're in, you're out. We're tribalizing. We're in, you're out because we said so. Cognitive reappraisal is never about accepting caustic or terrible behavior among ourselves or others. If you're in an abusive environment, it's not to say, well, you know, Frank had a tough childhood, he slaps him around once in a while, but gosh, I got a nice car. That's not what it's about. It's never about that. It is about us looking at people around us and saying, I see this in you. I see this in you. It is not about excusing caustic behavior. It's not about saying, oh gosh, well that's okay. No, we don't do that. But we do look at ourselves and others. Right? So, the themes we see in anxiety is threat. In depression is loss. In anger, there's 4 things you need to think about. One is protection. If you're angry, you want to protect your kid? Cool. Okay? Rogue moms. The second is injustice and inadequacy. If I get angry and I get hurt, if I get mad at my wife, am I protecting myself? Is I feel like there's a sense of injustice and inadequacy? Yeah, probably me, not her, right? I'm feeling inadequate. Maybe I didn't do this. Anybody know who Carlos Santana is? He's a rocker, right? Carlos Santana was married to his wife 34 years. It took him 27 years to admit that he had been sexually molested when he was a kid. 27 years. Why? He said, I felt inadequate, right? If I told her that, if I shared that with her, I'm done, I'm toast. No, he wasn't. It freed him. Power and control. We see this in domestic violence cases. We see it in kids who have intermittent explosive disorder or oppositional defiance. These are kids who blow up and they don't care, do not care. I'm going to control and make you do what I want simply by my power. These are the people who care about your opinion. They will drive it, right? And that is the way I do it. The last one, mood disorders, we see in depression. This is disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. You will see this in kids who have this explosive anger. But the difference is they can't control it. They cry. I don't want to be like this. Okay? Or some women have premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It's called PMDD. That time when the estrogen and progesterone balance are out, they would as soon strangle their husband as, right? Thank him for what he's doing. Listen, I had one patient.
Magnesium helps.
Yeah. Whatever you find, all right? Listen, I live in an estrogen-rich environment. So when my girls, I'm at the store, go, will you pick up Dove chocolate, milk, and dark? Pick up Hostess ding-dongs. We want some of this, right? I don't go, are you serious? For real? That's not good for you. I'm like, okay, anything else you want? And then, there you go, girls. Love you. So that's a part of this, but that is medical. That is not like behavioral. This is behavioral, that's medical. Because of the change, the fluctuations in your hormone levels, right? Just like it is in kids who are disruptive PMDD. They just get overwrought and then they feel terrible. They cry. I don't know why I get so angry. I just feel terrible about myself. So, how you can help? Talking about it, right? Helping them understand you get it, but you don't put thoughts in their head if they're suicidal or talking about it. That's not happen. What helps right now? What can I do right now to help you? Right? What can I do right now? Reassure that you're supportive. Take the symptoms seriously, seek treatment. Create objectively true mental anchor scripts, right? So what do I mean by that? Your kid says, your friend says, I am this. You say, no, this is who you are. And you list the things that you know about them that are objectively true. You're not making it up. You're not making this up. This is what I see in you. I know it because it's here. You failed science and math, but you got an A in history and English. I'm a failure. No, you're not. You failed those two courses. You are not a failure because you got objectively true information here. Make sense? You challenge it because it's like a spiritual warfare. You challenge it and you say, this is not who you are. It is a moment in time in which you are struggling. But guess what? It is not who you are. And you create objectively true things. Being sad, tell them to snap out of it, doesn't work. Sadness is not depression. Because sadness does not eat away at your self-worth. Sadness does not eat away and create all these caustic things. We've been sad, right? So when you say, I've been sad, well, good. You can be sad, but you still feel good about yourself when you're coming out of it. You still feel like, I've got a hope, like, well, when I get over this, it'll be better. Depression is not what's sad. That's not what it is. It is completely different. Facts, it's a medical disorder. It's not about bad parenting, generally. If a kid grew up with adverse childhood experiences, parents who were neglectful, didn't care, had no care about what their well-being was, it might. But generally, parents like you all, no, it's generally not the case. If a kid has depression, activates, it's not about you being a bad parent. They used to call children, or people who developed schizophrenia in the 50s, 60s, they said the moms were refrigerator moms. They were icebox moms. They laid at their feet. We know it's genetic now. They'd say, well, your mother didn't hold you, didn't care for you enough, right? She's an icebox. Like, you meet her? Wow. She's like an icebox, right? No wonder the kid has schizophrenia. That's not it. Cancer now, a person isn't dangerous. People with mental health issues 2.5 times more likely to be victimized than they are to victimize others. You can get better. You have evidence-based therapy, medication, exercise, diet, sleep. What doesn't work when we do cognitive reappraisal, avoid this, is venting. I've done it, maybe you've done it, but I get mad about stuff, right? I vent, go, oh, I'm gonna vent. Venting from a neuroscience standpoint, a therapeutic standpoint, is not good. Why? Because here's what happens when I vent. My limbic gets hot, I'm angry, I see one thing, you did this, and I want to share it with somebody else. And when I do that, I am ruminating. I am fueling my objectivity of you. I'm not fueling humanity. Can you believe you did that? Right? And then I pull somebody else in. I pull Jason. Jason, get over here. I can tell you about this. Right? And they go, yeah, wow, that's bad. Right? Oh man, so let's both get mad. Right? Venting is bad. Bad. If you find yourself have a propensity towards that, I understand it, I get it, that's injustice. You are angry because of injustice or inadequacy, right? It's not good. Don't vent. Reappraise. I am not happy about this, but I can see 1, 2, 3 things. I can see those things. Those things inform me. It doesn't make the problem go away, and it doesn't mean I'm not going to address it. It does help me not continue to ruminate. Because when we do that, guess whose physiology it is? Ours, right? If you're in a bad situation, you might have to leave it. Bad work situation, some environment like that, you have to leave it because that's going to help you. That's not saying I'm going to stay here and get beat up and I'm going to stay here, right? It's powerful stuff, but that's not going to help you. Fundamentally, that is, you are wasting time and you're in a bad state when you continue to do that. Evidence-based therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, kind of what I do, some other acceptance therapy, in some cases medication, that's fine. What happens when we're depressed, it downregulates some neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. The medications don't create more, they upregulate. What it means is they keep the serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine in play. So there's a thing called reuptake, it's kind of complicated, but it keeps it in play. And when it keeps those things in play, we tend to feel better. Dopamine is called that's the granddaddy of neurotransmitters. That's the pleasure. When we eat that chocolate or toasted, you're like, oh man, I love these things. Oh, this is good. That's the dopamine kicking up, right? You're like, oh man, I can do this all night. Thank you. You kids go to bed. So it doesn't discriminate. So exercise helps, diet, sleep, but it'll get disrupted. It doesn't matter. Depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, it doesn't matter. It cuts across all economic, it cuts across all racial lines, it just doesn't matter, right? John Nash, you know who Dr. John Nash is? John Nash won the Nobel Prize in economics. He's brilliant. He's a professor at Princeton. And he developed schizophrenia medication. His son has schizophrenia. He's a brilliant mathematician too. Cuts across all lines. It doesn't matter. I work with physicians, executives, people who got a G. Doesn't care. Right? So hopefully we understand that this is important to inform us that you make a difference every time you hug that kid, every time you care for him, every time you listen to him. You're like, I only did that. You did more than that. You're doing way more than that. Right? Good. So why do I do this free? Right? Because you saved me. People like you. My parents divorced when I was 6. I found a friend at 15. They took me in. Most of my life, nobody ever knew I lived in poverty. Food stamps, clothes vouchers, free school lunches, all of it. I was terribly embarrassed by that. Those people didn't care. Every time I went to fail, every single time, I felt peace. I felt comfort. I felt accepted. Every time. I hate crying, but my friend, the psychologist, sent me a thing about 8 reasons why people who cry when they're talking are strong, or emotionally strong. Okay, I don't feel it, but anyway. But every time they did that, the first time I went on vacation was with them. The first time I went snow skiing was with them. Every single time they took me in. My mom was in the ICU one Christmas Eve, and my buddy came over. You're gonna spend it with us. You understand? It was those things. And every time I was anxious, when I graduated high school early because I had to go to work, not because I wanted to, We had 3 sources of income. My mom's disability check, mine as a dependent, and my dad's child support. They ended in May of that year. I graduated in June. What was coming was not good, but I went to work. And every time I thought about the anxiety of the world, I thought about them. And not only thought about them, they would be proactive. What can we do? How can we help? Right? So I do this because of you. I don't want anything for it. I don't need anything for it. But you know what? Because I already got it. When we pray, when we reach out, it informs us of something. That Samaritan leper, that wasn't about getting healed. It was, but he went back to Jesus because it informed him of something bigger. All right, you mentioned the prayers he threw up, separated from his family, how awful he looked. All right? It informs you of something better, that perhaps somebody cares, perhaps somebody listens. All right? So you're doing that. Okay, that's enough. Sorry.